What would you do if you caught your husband cheating? Cry, scream, file for divorce. Well, Sarah Bennett had a different idea entirely. She decided to introduce her cheating husband and his lover to the front bumper of his own truck. But here's the twist that will blow your mind. What happened next wasn't what anyone expected. Not the husband, not the lover, and definitely not the police. This is a story about betrayal, revenge, and the moment a quiet housewife became the most terrifying woman in America. And I guarantee you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at marriage the same way again. But before we dive into this jaw-dropping tale, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because stories like this one are exactly why this channel exists. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Let me paint you a picture of suburban perfection. Sarah Bennett, 35 years old, living in a pristine two-story house on Elm Street in the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows everyone's business. But Sarah wasn't the type to gossip over garden fences or host elaborate dinner parties. She was the invisible wife, the one who made everything work behind the scenes. Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., Sarah's alarm would go off. Not because she needed it, her internal clock was more reliable than any timepiece, but because routine gave her comfort. She would slip out of bed without waking David, pad downstairs in her worn slippers, and start the coffee maker. The same routine every single day for 10 years. While the coffee brewed, Sarah would prepare David's breakfast. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, lightly buttered, fresh orange juice in his favorite glass, the one they'd gotten as a wedding gift from his mother. She would pack his gym bag with military precision. Clean workout clothes folded just so, his protein powder, a fresh towel that smelled like the fabric softener she'd been using since they were newlyweds. Sarah took pride in these small acts of service. She believed that love was demonstrated through consistency, through the 1,000 tiny ways she made David's life easier. When he complimented her coffee or thanked her for remembering to pack his favorite protein bars, Sarah felt validated, useful, loved. For 10 years, this had been enough. Sarah genuinely believed she was living the American dream, married to her college sweetheart, owner of a beautiful home in a safe neighborhood, financially stable, respected in their community. She served on the PTA committee at the local elementary school even though they didn't have children yet. She volunteered at the animal shelter every Saturday morning. She had carved out a life that looked perfect from the outside. But perfection, as Sarah was about to learn, is often just an illusion that hides the cracks underneath. David Bennett wasn't a bad husband, at least not in the traditional sense. He didn't drink excessively, didn't gamble, didn't lose his temper or raise his hand to Sarah. He worked hard as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, earned a decent living, remembered her birthday and their anniversary. He was the kind of husband that other women envied, stable, reliable, present. But somewhere along the way, David had grown restless. The routine that gave Sarah comfort had become suffocating to him. The predictability of their life, the same conversations over dinner, the same weekend activities, the same pattern of intimacy that had dwindled to mechanical monthly encounters, it all felt like a prison to David. He never told Sarah about his growing dissatisfaction. Instead, he began to withdraw emotionally while maintaining the facade of their perfect marriage. He would sit at the breakfast table, eating the eggs Sarah had prepared, nodding and making appropriate responses to her chatter about her day ahead, but his mind was elsewhere. David started working later, claiming big projects and demanding clients. Sarah, trusting and supportive as always, never questioned these explanations. She would keep his dinner warm in the oven, sometimes falling asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home. The first real sign something was changing came 3 months ago when David announced his newfound passion for fitness. At 38, he claimed he was having a midlife awakening about his health. He joined an expensive gym called Iron Paradise on the other side of town, invested in new workout clothes, supplements, and a complete transformation of his diet. Sarah was actually encouraged by this development. She thought David's new energy and focus on health was a positive change. She started preparing healthier meals, researching nutrition, even suggesting they could work out together. But David politely declined her offers to join him, insisting he needed this time to focus on himself. What Sarah didn't know was that David's fitness transformation had nothing to do with health, and everything to do with impressing someone new. The changes in David were subtle at first, the kind of things only a wife of 10 years would notice. New cologne that replaced the familiar scent she'd grown to associate with home and comfort. This new fragrance was sharper, more expensive, with notes of bergamot and cedar that seemed chosen to attract rather than comfort. Sarah first noticed it on a Wednesday evening when David came home from his workout. She hugged him as she always did, breathing in what she expected to be his familiar scent mixed with the honest smell of exercise. Instead, she caught something floral and distinctly feminine clinging to his gym clothes. Lavender. Rich, expensive lavender that definitely didn't come from any men's body wash. When Sarah asked about the unfamiliar scent, David barely looked up from his phone, claiming he didn't smell anything. He suggested maybe she was imagining things, that perhaps the new fabric softener she'd been using was creating strange scent combinations. The dismissal stung, but Sarah let it go. She trusted David implicitly, and the idea that he might be lying to her simply didn't compute in her world. But the lavender scent persisted, growing stronger each night. Sarah began to notice other changes too. David's gym sessions were lasting longer and longer. He who used to be home by 6:30 sharp was now rolling in at 9, 10, sometimes 11 p.m. Always with apologetic explanations about getting caught up in his workout routine, trying new classes, or helping other gym members with their form. Sarah tried to be understanding. She was proud that David was taking his health seriously, even if it meant eating dinner alone most nights. She would sit at their kitchen table, looking at the empty chair across from her, telling herself that this was temporary, that once David settled into his new routine, things would return to normal. The third red flag was David's relationship with his phone. For 10 years, his phone had been just another household item, sitting openly on kitchen counters, easily accessible to Sarah when she needed to check the weather or play music while cleaning. David had never been secretive about his communications, often asking Sarah to respond to texts for him while he was driving or had his hands full. But suddenly, David's phone became an extension of his body. It was always face down on every surface, never left unattended, and now protected by a password that Sarah didn't know. When she mentioned this change, David explained that his company had implemented new security protocols requiring password protection on all employee devices. It was a reasonable explanation, one that Sarah accepted without question. What Sarah didn't realize was that she was witnessing the classic signs of infidelity, textbook behaviors that millions of betrayed spouses recognize only in hindsight. The new attention to appearance, the protective behavior around communication devices, the mysterious time away from home, the emotional distance. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. Most women in Sarah's position would have started asking direct questions by this point. They would have demanded access to the phone, followed their husband, or hired a private investigator. But Sarah had been conditioned by 10 years of trust to give David the benefit of the doubt. She had built her entire identity around being the supportive, understanding wife who didn't nag or make demands. Sarah was also, without realizing it, demonstrating another common trait among betrayed spouses, the ability to rationalize away obvious warning signs. Every red flag had a reasonable explanation in Sarah's mind. The cologne could be from someone at the gym. The late nights were about David's new commitment to fitness. The phone secrecy was a work requirement. Sarah's mind worked overtime to maintain her faith in her marriage. But all of that rationalization came crashing down on a Tuesday night that would change Sarah's life forever. It was 10:47 p.m. when David fell asleep on the living room couch, exhausted from what he claimed had been an especially intense workout. His phone, for once, wasn't glued to his hand. It lay beside him on the couch cushion, screen dark but somehow still radiating the secrets it contained. Sarah was in the kitchen, following her nightly routine of cleaning up dinner dishes and preparing for the next day. She was wiping down the counters when she heard the unmistakable sound that had become the soundtrack of David's new life. Buzz, buzz. The phone lit up, casting an eerie glow in the darkened living room. Sarah glanced over at David, who remained deeply asleep, his breathing steady and peaceful. The phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. Sarah dried her hands on the dish towel, her curiosity overcoming her usual respect for David's privacy. She told herself she was just checking to see if it was something work-related that might require waking him. After all, David had mentioned several times that his job sometimes required after-hours emergency calls. She walked quietly to the couch and looked at the phone screen. What she saw there changed everything. The messages were from someone named Isabella, though in David's contacts she was saved with a flame emoji. Sarah read the preview text once, then again, her brain struggling to process the words that shattered her world. The first message read, "Can't wait to taste you again tomorrow night, same place, same time." Before Sarah could fully absorb the impact of those words, another message appeared. "Tonight was incredible. You drive me crazy when you touch me like that." And then a third, "I love how you make me feel, so much more intense than I ever imagined possible." Sarah stood frozen in her living room, holding the phone that contained the evidence of her husband's betrayal. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of trust, 10 years of building a life together, and it was all being undone by text messages from a woman whose name Sarah had never heard. The rational part of Sarah's mind told her to wake David immediately, to demand an explanation, to scream and cry and fight for her marriage. But a different part of her, a part she didn't even know existed, was calculating something else entirely. Sarah set the phone down exactly where David had left it, the screen going dark as if the devastating messages had never appeared. She went upstairs, brushed her teeth, changed into her nightgown, and lay down beside her sleeping husband as if nothing had happened. But inside Sarah Bennett, something fundamental had shifted. The trusting, supportive wife was being replaced by someone much more dangerous, a woman who had discovered she was capable of patience that bordered on predatory. The next morning, Sarah made David's coffee exactly as she had for 10 years. 2 sugars, splash of cream served in his favorite mug. She kissed him goodbye and wished him a great workout, her voice steady and warm. David never suspected that his wife now knew about Isabella, about the affair that was apparently passionate enough to generate late-night text messages about tasting and touching. Sarah spent that day in a strange state of suspended animation. She went through her regular routines, grocery shopping, laundry, preparing dinner, but her mind was working on a completely different level. She wasn't planning confrontation or divorce proceedings. Instead, Sarah found herself thinking like a detective, wondering who Isabella was, where they met, and how long this had been going on. Over the next week, Sarah began her transformation from housewife to investigator. She started paying attention to David's patterns with forensic precision. She noted the days he came home smelling most strongly of lavender perfume. She tracked the correlation between his late nights and his mood the following morning. She observed that David was happiest and most energetic on Tuesdays and Fridays, suggesting those might be the days he saw Isabella. Sarah's investigation led her to David's gym, Iron Paradise. She had never seen the place where her husband spent so much of his time, but now she parked across the street and watched. The gym was everything David had described, upscale, modern, filled with attractive people who clearly took their fitness seriously. On her third surveillance session, Sarah saw David emerge from the gym at 6:45 p.m. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a woman who could only be Isabella. She was stunning in that effortless way that made Sarah feel invisible by comparison. Tall-toned, with long dark hair and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're beautiful. Isabella Rodriguez was 28 years old, a personal trainer with an Instagram following and the kind of body that graced fitness magazine covers. Sarah learned all of this through careful online research, studying Isabella's social media presence like she was preparing for an exam. Through Instagram photos and check-ins, Sarah discovered that Isabella drove a red Mustang convertible and lived in a trendy downtown apartment complex. She had graduated from the State University with a degree in exercise science and had been working at Iron Paradise for 2 years. She posted inspirational quotes about transformation and living your best life, never knowing that one of her followers was the wife of the man she was sleeping with. Day after day, Sarah watched and learned. She discovered that David and Isabella had been training together for exactly 3 months, the same 3 months that David had been coming home late with lavender perfume on his clothes. She observed their body language, the way Isabella touched David's arm when she laughed, the way David looked at her with an intensity Sarah hadn't seen directed at her in years. The real breakthrough in Sarah's investigation came on a Friday night when she decided to follow them after their workout. Sarah had never followed anyone in her life, had never engaged in any behavior that could be considered stalking, but she found herself driving several car lengths behind David's truck as he and Isabella left the gym together. They didn't go to Isabella's apartment complex as Sarah had expected. Instead, they drove to the outskirts of town, to a section of Route 49 that Sarah rarely had reason to visit. The area was a mix of truck stops, fast food restaurants, and businesses that catered to interstate travelers. It wasn't romantic or attractive, which made it perfect for people who wanted to avoid being seen. Sarah watched from the parking lot of a closed gas station as David and Isabella entered the Sunset Motel, one of those establishments that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions about why guests paid in cash. It was exactly the kind of place Sarah would never have imagined her husband visiting, seedy and desperate in a way that made her skin crawl. For 2 hours, Sarah sat in her car, staring at room 14 where David and Isabella had disappeared. She could have left. She could have driven home, packed David's belongings, and had divorce papers waiting when he returned. But something kept her in that parking lot, something dark and patient that was growing stronger inside her. When David and Isabella finally emerged from the motel room, they looked like teenagers in love. They were laughing, holding hands, completely absorbed in each other. David spun Isabella around in the parking lot, both of them giddy with the intoxication of forbidden romance. They had no idea they were being watched by the woman whose life they were destroying. That night, as Sarah lay in bed next to David, listening to him sleep peacefully after his evening of betrayal, she made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to confront David. She wasn't going to file for divorce. She wasn't going to hire a lawyer or a private investigator. Sarah was going to do something much more permanent. The plan that formed in Sarah's mind over the following days was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its finality. David had one true love in his life, and it wasn't Sarah. It wasn't even Isabella. It was his truck. David's Ford F-250 wasn't just a vehicle. It was his pride and joy, his most prized possession, the symbol of everything he valued about himself. He had bought the truck 3 years ago, midnight blue with custom chrome accents and a sound system that could be heard 3 blocks away. David washed that truck every weekend, parked it away from other vehicles to avoid dings, and talked about it the way other men talked about their children. The truck represented David's identity, his sense of power and control. It was masculine and imposing, exactly the kind of vehicle that would appeal to a woman like Isabella. Sarah had heard David telling his friends that the truck was a chick magnet, a comment that had seemed harmless at the time but now carried a different meaning entirely. Sarah knew everything about that truck, including the fact that David kept a spare key hidden in the wheel well on the driver's side. He had shown her the hiding spot years ago, back when they still shared the details of their lives with each other. It was information that David had probably forgotten he'd shared, but Sarah remembered everything. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah refined her plan with the patience of someone who had finally found her purpose. She studied David and Isabella's patterns, confirming that they met at the Sunset Motel every Tuesday and Friday night. She drove by the motel during different times to understand the layout, the lighting, the potential witnesses. Sarah wasn't planning to scare them or threaten them. What she had in mind was so much worse than fear or intimidation. She was going to destroy them completely, to take away their sense of safety, their arrogance, their belief that they could destroy other people's lives without consequences. But more than that, Sarah was planning to kill them both. The realization that she was capable of murder should have shocked Sarah, should have sent her running to a therapist or a priest or anyone who could help her process these dark thoughts. Instead, she felt a sense of clarity she had never experienced before. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah felt powerful, in control, completely certain about what she needed to do. She wasn't thinking about the legal consequences or the moral implications. All Sarah could think about was the image of David and Isabella laughing in that motel parking lot, completely oblivious to the pain they were causing, the life they were destroying. They needed to understand what it felt like to have everything taken away in an instant. Tuesday night, November 15th, Route 49, the Sunset Motel. Sarah sat in her car in the same spot where she had conducted her surveillance, watching the familiar scene unfold. David and Isabella emerged from room 14 at 10:23 p.m., their usual time. They were laughing about something, Isabella playfully pushing David as they walked toward their cars. Sarah got out of her car and walked calmly to David's truck. The spare key was exactly where it had always been, tucked into the wheel well on the driver's side. Her hands were perfectly steady as she unlocked the door and climbed into the cab. The F-250 roared to life with the deep, powerful rumble that David loved so much. At the sound of the engine, both David and Isabella turned toward the truck, their faces shifting from confusion to recognition to absolute terror in the span of seconds. Sarah could see the exact moment David realized what was happening. His mouth opened in a scream that she couldn't hear over the sound of the engine. Isabella grabbed David's arm, both of them frozen in place between the parked cars. Sarah put the truck in drive and pressed down on the accelerator. The massive vehicle lurched forward, its headlights cutting through the darkness and illuminating David and Isabella like actors on a stage. They pressed themselves against the car behind them, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The parking lot had become a trap, and Sarah was the hunter. The truck picked up speed, 50 feet from impact, 40 feet, 30 feet. David was screaming Sarah's name now, his voice cutting through the night air. Isabella was crying, her hands pressed against the car behind her as if she could somehow push through solid metal to escape. 20 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. Sarah could see their faces clearly now, could see the absolute terror in their eyes, the moment they understood that their affair had consequences they had never imagined. This was what Sarah wanted, not just their deaths, but their complete understanding of why they were about to die. 5 feet, 3 feet. Sarah never touched the brakes. The impact was devastating and instantaneous. The force of a 7,000-pound truck traveling at 35 miles per hour doesn't leave room for survival or last words or final thoughts. David and Isabella were killed immediately, their bodies crushed between the truck's front bumper and the car behind them. Sarah sat in the truck for several minutes afterward, engine still running, staring at what she had done. The quiet housewife who had made coffee and folded laundry for 10 years had just committed double murder with the same methodical precision she brought to her household chores. She felt no regret, no shock, no sudden return to sanity. Instead, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion, as if she had finally done something that mattered, something that would be remembered. Sarah pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, Sarah's voice was calm and clear. She reported that she had just killed her husband and his lover with his own truck, provided her location, and asked how long it would take for the police to arrive. When the first responders reached the Sunset Motel, they found a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. The truck was still running, its front end embedded in a compact car, with two bodies trapped between the vehicles. Sarah Bennett sat behind the wheel with her hands folded in her lap, waiting patiently for her arrest. She didn't resist when they handcuffed her. She didn't ask for a lawyer or claim self-defense or temporary insanity. When the lead detective asked if she understood what she had done, Sarah simply replied that she had done what needed to be done. The trial of Sarah Bennett became a media sensation, the kind of case that divides public opinion and spawns countless true crime documentaries. Sarah Bennett, the mild-mannered housewife who had snapped in the most violent way possible, who had used her husband's beloved truck as a weapon of revenge. The prosecution painted Sarah as a cold-blooded killer who had committed premeditated murder, stalking her victims and planning their deaths with chilling precision. They presented evidence of Sarah's surveillance activities, her research into Isabella's background, her careful study of the couple's routines. This wasn't a crime of passion, they argued, but calculated revenge. The defense team tried to argue temporary insanity, claiming that years of emotional neglect and the trauma of discovering David's affair had pushed Sarah beyond her breaking point. They brought in psychiatrists who testified about the psychological impact of infidelity, the way betrayal can shatter a person's sense of reality and self-worth. But Sarah herself refused to cooperate with the insanity defense. When she took the stand in her own defense, she spoke with the same calm precision that had characterized her phone call to 911. Sarah testified that she had discovered her husband's affair, conducted surveillance to confirm her suspicions, and decided that David and Isabella needed to face consequences for their actions. She stated clearly that she had taken David's truck, driven it directly into them, and understood exactly what she was doing and what the results would be. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Sarah Bennett to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Sarah showed no emotion. She nodded once, turned to face the gallery where David's family sat weeping, and told them simply that she was sorry for their loss. Today, Sarah Bennett sits in Mountain View Correctional Facility, a maximum security women's prison, serving a life sentence for the brutal murders of her cheating husband and his lover. The quiet woman who once made perfect coffee and folded laundry with mathematical precision now spends her days in a 6 by 8 foot cell, surrounded by concrete walls and steel bars. Prison has not broken Sarah Bennett. If anything, she seems more at peace than she ever was during her marriage. She has never expressed remorse for the murders. In her only prison interview conducted 2 years after her conviction, Sarah stated that while some people think she threw her life away for revenge, she believes she finally took control of it. Sarah spends her days reading, writing in a journal that prison officials monitor, and working in the prison laundry, a job assignment that some see as cruelly ironic. She has refused all interview requests from journalists and documentary filmmakers. She has no contact with David's family or her own relatives, most of whom have distanced themselves from her crimes. The Ford F-250 was destroyed in the impact and later crushed for scrap metal. The Sunset Motel was eventually demolished, the site now occupied by a chain restaurant that serves families traveling the interstate. But the story of Sarah Bennett lives on as a chilling reminder that betrayal can turn even the quietest person into a killer. Isabella Rodriguez's family has never spoken publicly about the case, but they established a scholarship in her name for young women pursuing careers in fitness and health. David Bennett's family moved away from the community where the murders occurred, unable to cope with the constant reminders of the tragedy. The case has been studied by criminologists and psychologists interested in understanding how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary violence. Sarah Bennett had no history of mental illness, no previous criminal record, no red flags that might have predicted her capacity for murder. She was, by all accounts, exactly what she appeared to be, a devoted wife whose world was shattered by betrayal. Some experts argue that Sarah's case demonstrates the dangerous potential that exists within anyone who feels they have nothing left to lose. Others point to the methodical nature of her planning as evidence that some people are simply capable of evil when the right circumstances align. What everyone agrees on is that the Sarah Bennett case changed how we think about the quiet ones, the invisible wives and husbands who seem so stable and predictable. Because Sarah proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you never see coming. So what do you think? Was Sarah Bennett a victim who was pushed too far, or a cold-blooded killer who deserved her life sentence? Did David and Isabella's betrayal justify murder, or did Sarah's revenge cross an unforgivable line? This case divided the nation when it happened, and it continues to generate debate today. Some people see Sarah as a symbol of what happens when someone is pushed beyond their breaking point, while others see her as a calculated murderer who destroyed 3 lives in one moment of rage. The truth, as it often is, probably lies somewhere in between. Sarah Bennett was both victim and perpetrator, both the wronged wife and the woman who chose murder over divorce court. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious to hear where you stand on this controversial case. Do you think Sarah's actions were understandable, even if they weren't justifiable? Or do you believe there's never an excuse for taking another person's life? And if this story of betrayal and deadly revenge shocked you, you need to hear what's coming next week. I've got the case of a woman who discovered her husband's affair and planned an even more elaborate revenge, one that took 2 years to execute and left an entire family destroyed. The twist: she was never convicted of a crime because technically she never broke any laws. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because true crime stories this intense don't come around every day. Hit that like button if Sarah's story left you speechless, and share this video with anyone who thinks they know how far betrayal can push someone. Remember, betrayal can break people in ways we never expect. The question isn't whether Sarah Bennett was right or wrong, it's whether we can truly understand what drives someone to cross that final line between victim and killer. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll dive into another case that will make you question everything you think you know about love, revenge, and justice. Until then, stay safe out there and remember, sometimes the people we trust most are capable of the unthinkable.